The city knew Richard Sterling as a titan of industry, a man whose Midas touch turned every venture to gold. His wife, Amelia, was the graceful, adoring woman on his arm, her pregnancy the final, perfect piece of their public fairy tale. But fairy tales are often just beautiful cages. The night she disappeared, the only trace left was the lingering scent of her jasmine perfume and a single pearl earring on the cold marble floor. Weeks later, as Richard unveiled his new love at the city's most extravagant gala, he had no idea that the fairy tale's forgotten princess was in the crowd, watching his every move. The penthouse apartment felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit on modern wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the sprawling city skyline, a glittering tapestry of a world Richard Sterling felt he owned. Amelia had once found the view romantic, a nightly spectacle just for them. Now it felt like a constant reminder of how small she was, how distant everything felt, even her own husband who stood just across the room. Richard was on the phone, his back to her, one hand gesturing impatiently as he paced the length of the Persian rug. His voice was a low, commanding murmur, the tone he used for business, the one that left no room for argument. It was a tone she was hearing more and more often. "Just handle it, Mark. I don't pay you for excuses," he clipped out, before ending the call with a sharp tap of his finger. He turned, a practiced smile instantly softening the hard lines of his face as his eyes landed on her. "Sorry about that, darling. Just another fire to put out," he said, striding over to her. He placed a hand on her swollen belly, his touch cool and brief. "And how are my two favorite people doing?" Amelia forced a smile. "We're fine, Richard. The baby's been kicking all day. I think he's going to be a soccer player." "A future CEO, more like," Richard corrected lightly, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. He leaned in to kiss her forehead, his lips as fleeting as his touch. "I have to run. Dinner with some investors from Singapore. Don't wait up." He was gone before she could ask who, where, why. It was always like this. His life was a series of closed doors, brief explanations, and the unspoken expectation that she wouldn't pry. In the beginning of their whirlwind romance, she had mistaken his possessiveness for passion, his control for protectiveness. He had swept her off her feet, a handsome, powerful man who promised her the world, and he had delivered in a way. She lived in a palace, wore clothes that cost more than her parents' car, and was the envy of everyone in their circle. But the gold felt cold, the silk constricting. Her old life, her friends, her career as a children's book illustrator had all faded into the background, deemed unnecessary distractions by Richard. He wanted her here, in this beautiful box, waiting for him, especially now with the baby coming, their son, the Sterling heir. She knew how much this baby meant to him, how it solidified his legacy. Sometimes she felt like a vessel, a beautiful incubator for his ambitions. Later that evening, as Amelia sat alone in the nursery she had painstakingly decorated, a wave of profound loneliness washed over her. The room was a soft, dreamy landscape of pale blues and creams, with hand-painted clouds on the ceiling and a mobile of gentle, smiling stars. She had poured all her love, all her frustrated creativity, into this room. It was the one space in the penthouse that felt like hers, that felt like a place where real, messy life could happen. She ran a hand over the smooth, cool wood of the crib, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings. A sudden, sharp kick from within her belly made her gasp, then laugh. "Hello in there," she whispered, her voice soft in the quiet room. "It's just you and me tonight, little one." A faint vibration from the living room drew her attention. Richard's tablet. He'd left it on the coffee table, a rare oversight. He was obsessively private about his devices, a fact that had once seemed a quirk of a high-powered businessman, but now felt like another locked door. Hesitantly, she walked back into the living room. The screen was dark, but a notification banner glowed for a moment before fading. A message from someone named Isabel. "Can't wait. Tonight will be perfect." Amelia's heart stuttered. Isabel. The name was unfamiliar. It wasn't his assistant or his sister or anyone she knew. She told herself it was nothing. An investor, a colleague. But the wording felt intimate. "Can't wait." It wasn't business language. Her hand hovered over the tablet, her mind a whirlwind of suspicion and self-reproach. She was being paranoid. Pregnancy hormones, Richard would say, with that dismissive little chuckle of his. She had never snooped before, had always respected the boundaries he set so firmly. But the loneliness of the empty apartment, the casual way he had left, the strange intimacy of the message, it all coalesced into a single unbearable weight of doubt. With trembling fingers, she picked up the tablet. It was unlocked. Her breath hitched. She navigated to his messages, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The thread with Isabel was right at the top. She scrolled, her eyes scanning dates, times, words that blurred and sharpened in focus. There were dozens of messages, stretching back months. They were filled with inside jokes, shared articles, plans for lunches and drinks she had never known about. And then she saw it. A message from Richard sent just that afternoon. She suspects nothing. Tonight we can finally talk about the future. Our future. The tablet slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. The sound echoed in the cavernous silence of the penthouse. Our future. Not their future. Not Richard, Amelia, and their baby. Our future. Richard and Isabel. The beautiful cage she had been living in suddenly felt like a tomb. The air grew thick, suffocating. Every beautiful object, every piece of art, every luxurious fabric seemed to mock her. They were props in a play, and she had just discovered she was the fool. The city lights outside blurred into a cruel, glittering smear through her tears. She wrapped her arms around her belly, a primal, protective instinct taking over. It wasn't just her he was betraying. It was their son. Her mind raced, a chaotic storm of shock and pain. What did he mean, the future? Was he planning on leaving her? After the baby was born? The thought was a physical blow, knocking the wind from her lungs. She thought of her family, how impressed they were with Richard, how they told her she was the luckiest woman in the world. She thought of her abandoned career, the friends she had let drift away. She had built her entire world around this man, and she was starting to realize it was a world built on a foundation of lies. A cold, terrifying clarity began to settle over her. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't bring her child into this lie. But where would she go? What would she do? He controlled everything. The money, the cars, the narrative of their life. To the world, she was Mrs. Sterling, a pampered, pregnant wife. If she left, he would paint her as unstable, ungrateful, perhaps even mentally ill. He would use her pregnancy against her. He would fight for custody, and with his resources, he would win. The kicking in her womb became more insistent, a frantic little drumbeat. It was as if the baby could sense her distress. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's okay, my love. Mommy will protect you. I promise." In that moment, a new resolve hardened within her. The tears stopped. The panic receded, replaced by a steely determination. She would not be the victim in his story. She would not be the crazy, hysterical wife he left behind. She had to disappear. Not just leave, but vanish. Erase herself from his life so completely that by the time he realized she was gone for good, she and her baby would be somewhere he could never find them. The plan was terrifying, half-formed, and utterly insane. But as she looked around the opulent prison that had been her home, she knew it was the only way. She had to become a ghost. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception. Amelia became an actress in her own life, playing the role of the blissfully unaware, doting wife. Every morning, she made Richard his coffee, just the way he liked it, with a single spoonful of raw sugar. She'd kiss his cheek as he left for the office. The scent of his expensive cologne, a nauseating reminder of his lies. She'd smile, ask about his day, and listen to his carefully curated stories of meetings and deadlines, all while the words from the tablet burned in her memory. Our future. The performance was exhausting. Every smile felt like a crack in her own facade. Every touch was tainted. She began to see the whispers and shadows of his betrayal everywhere. A receipt from a restaurant she'd never been to, tucked into a coat pocket. A hushed phone call in his study. The door clicked shut just as she walked past. He started working later, his excuses becoming more frequent and less plausible. Emergency board meeting, he'd say, or Had to wine and dine a new client. She'd just nod, the perfect, understanding wife, while a cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. One evening, he came home with the faint, unfamiliar scent of a woman's perfume clinging to his shirt. It wasn't the heavy, musky scent of a colleague or the floral notes of his assistant. It was light and citrusy, a scent that felt deliberately chosen, intimate. When she hugged him, she felt him stiffen for a fraction of a second, as if afraid she'd notice. She pulled back, a placid smile on her face. "You must be exhausted," she said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil inside her. "Long day?" "You have no idea," he sighed, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. He loosened his tie, his gaze already drifting towards his phone. "I'm just going to take a quick shower before dinner." As the water ran in their cavernous ensuite bathroom, Amelia walked into their walk-in closet, a space larger than her old apartment. She picked up the shirt he had discarded on the valet stand. She brought it to her nose and inhaled deeply. The citrusy scent was definitely there, tangled with his own. It was proof, another small, sharp piece of the puzzle. She felt a surge of rage so intense it made her dizzy. She wanted to scream, to throw the shirt in his face, to demand the truth, but she couldn't. A direct confrontation was exactly what he would expect, and it would give him the upper hand. He would twist it, turn it back on her. He'd call her emotional, irrational. "It's the hormones, darling. You're not thinking clearly." He had a way of making her feel like she was the one who was crazy, a subtle, insidious form of manipulation she now recognized as gaslighting. He had been doing it for years, slowly eroding her confidence, her instincts, her very sense of self. Instead of confronting him, she began to plan. Her disappearance had to be flawless. She started small, secretly siphoning off cash from the generous household allowance Richard provided. A few $100s here, a few hundred there. She'd buy groceries at a high-end market but pocket the change from a cheaper one, hiding the crisp bills in an old shoebox at the back of her closet, tucked beneath a pile of maternity sweaters she never wore. It was a pathetic amount compared to his millions, but it was a start. It was her own. Her past life, the one she had been encouraged to forget, became her secret weapon. She reactivated an old anonymous email account. Her first message was to an old college friend, Sarah, a freelance graphic designer who had once forged a press pass for them to sneak into a concert. They hadn't spoken in years, not since Richard had subtly implied Sarah was a bad influence. "Hey, Sarah," she wrote, her fingers shaking slightly. "It's been a long time. I'm in a difficult situation, and I need a huge favor. The kind you can't ask questions about. Can you help me?" The reply came within an hour. "Amelia, oh my God, I was so worried about you. Of course, anything. Just tell me what you need." Tears of relief streamed down Amelia's face. She wasn't entirely alone. Over the next week, they exchanged a series of cryptic emails. Amelia asked Sarah to create a new identity for her, a driver's license, a social security card, a birth certificate. Nothing that would stand up to intense scrutiny, but enough to get her an apartment, a job, a new life in a place where no one knew her name. Sarah, true to her word, didn't ask questions. She simply sent a list of what she needed: a recent photo, personal details to fabricate, and a way to get the documents to her. The photo was the hardest part. Amelia had to take a selfie that looked like a passport photo, devoid of emotion, a blank slate. She did it in the nursery one afternoon, the soft blue walls a stark contrast to the grim task. Looking at the image on her phone, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Her face was thinner, her eyes shadowed with a fear and resolve that hadn't been there months ago. This was the face of a stranger. This was the face of her future. She also began researching. Late at night, when Richard was asleep, she used a private browser on her phone to search for small, quiet towns hundreds of miles away. Places with transient populations where a new face wouldn't be an oddity. She looked for towns with community health centers that offered prenatal care for low-income women. She made lists, memorized bus routes, and studied maps. She was becoming a strategist, a fugitive. The fear was a constant companion, a cold presence in the pit of her stomach. But the planning gave her a sense of control she hadn't felt in years. One afternoon while Richard was at work, She was sorting through some old boxes in a storage closet when she found a forgotten relic of her past, her grandfather's old film camera. He had been an avid amateur photographer and had taught her how to use it when she was a teenager. Tucked inside the leather case was a small, powerful-looking lens, a telephoto lens. Her grandfather had called it his spy lens. A new, audacious idea began to form. It wasn't enough to just disappear. She needed leverage. She needed irrefutable proof of his betrayal, something that would protect her and her son if he ever did manage to find them. His word, his power, his money against hers. She wouldn't stand a chance. But a picture was worth 1,000 denials. She started carrying the camera, hidden in a large tote bag, whenever she left the penthouse. She began to follow him. It was a terrifying, reckless game. She'd take a different taxi, wear a large hat and sunglasses, and keep her distance. She trailed him to a discreet hotel bar, her heart pounding as she watched from across the street. She saw him meet a woman, a stunningly beautiful woman with sleek, dark hair and a confident, easy laugh. Isabel. Amelia raised the camera, the heavy lens feeling alien in her hands. Peering through the viewfinder, the world shrank to just the two of them at a small, intimate table. He was leaning in, his expression animated, charming. He touched the woman's hand. It was a casual, possessive gesture, the same way he used to touch her. The camera clicked, the sound lost in the city noise. She took another and another. Each photo was a nail in the coffin of her old life. Each photo was a stone in the foundation of her new one. Seeing them together so comfortable, so obviously entangled, didn't hurt as much as she expected. The initial searing pain of discovery had cooled into a hard, protective anger. This wasn't just an affair. This was a parallel life he had been building while she sat at home, waiting for him, carrying his child. She was no longer just a betrayed wife. She was a woman gathering evidence, a mother protecting her cub. The shadows were no longer just hiding his secrets. They were hiding her too. And soon she would be ready to step out of them, not into the light he commanded, but into a future of her own making. The night she chose was the night of the annual Sterling Corp charity auction. It was Richard's crowning social event of the year, a night he orchestrated with military precision. He would be the center of attention, schmoozing with the city's elite, basking in the glow of their admiration and his own manufactured philanthropy. He would be distracted, and he wouldn't be home until well after midnight. It was perfect. That evening, Amelia played her part to perfection. She feigned a headache, a common complaint in her third trimester. She rubbed her temples, put on a pained expression, and told Richard she didn't think she could handle a long, loud evening. "But darling, you have to be there," he insisted, adjusting his tuxedo in the mirror. He looked impossibly handsome, a prince in his bespoke suit. "It's our event. People will expect to see you." "I know, Richard, and I'm so sorry," she said, her voice laced with just the right amount of regret. She placed a hand on her belly. "The baby is just so heavy today, and my back is killing me. I'd be miserable, and I'd only bring you down. You go. You be charming for the both of us." He hesitated, his annoyance warring with the need to maintain the image of a concerned husband. "Well, if you're sure," he finally conceded. "I'll have the driver take you to your mother's tomorrow morning. A few days of rest will do you good." It was a lie, of course. He was just relieved. Her absence would free him up. Perhaps Isabel would be at the auction. The thought sent a jolt of ice through her veins, but she pushed it down. "Focus. That sounds lovely," she said, forcing a weak smile. "Now go, you'll be late. Knock 'em dead." He kissed her, a perfunctory peck on the cheek, and then he was gone. The moment the heavy penthouse door clicked shut, the performance was over. Amelia's frail demeanor vanished, replaced by a focused, almost frantic energy. She had a very small window. First, she went to the nursery. She packed a small diaper bag, not with diapers, but with the essentials for her new life. The fake documents Sarah had express mailed to a private P.O. box she'd set up were at the bottom. On top of them went the cash she had saved, neatly bundled. Then came the most important item, the film camera, with the roll of incriminating photos safely inside. She also packed a small, hand-knitted blue bonnet she had made for the baby. A tangible piece of love, a promise of the future she was fighting for. Next, she staged the scene. She went to their bedroom and pulled out a suitcase, leaving it open on the bed. She threw a few items of clothing in, haphazardly, as if she had packed in a hurry. She took her jewelry box and emptied its contents into her purse, leaving the box itself conspicuously open and empty on her vanity. She wanted it to look like a greedy, impulsive departure, the act of a spoiled wife having a tantrum. Then came the note. She sat at her delicate writing desk, her hand surprisingly steady. She couldn't make it sound too final, too planned. It had to be emotional, erratic. Richard, one. I can't do this anymore. The loneliness, the empty nights. I thought a baby would fix us, but it's only made it clearer how far apart we are. I need space. I need to think. I'm going away for a while. Don't try to find me. Amelia, it was simple, vague, and perfectly misleading. It painted her as unstable and flighty, feeding right into the narrative he would inevitably create. She left it propped up on his pillow, a final, deliberate lie. Her last act in the penthouse was one of small, symbolic rebellion. She walked through the silent, opulent rooms one last time. She touched the cold marble countertops, the soulless leather sofas, the priceless art that had always felt alien to her. Then she went to the kitchen, took the carton of organic eggs, the absurdly expensive kind Richard insisted on, and one by one cracked them into the sink. It was a petty, childish act, but it felt immensely satisfying. She took one last look at the glittering city view from the window. It wasn't her world. It never had been. With the diaper bag slung over her shoulder and her purse in her hand, she walked to the service elevator at the end of the hall, the one used by staff. She rode it down to the parking garage, her heart pounding with every floor they descended. She bypassed Richard's fleet of luxury cars and walked out into the cool night air, melting into the anonymity of the city streets. She didn't take a taxi from near the building. That would be too easy to trace. Instead, she walked a dozen blocks, her heavy belly making each step a conscious effort. She pulled the hood of her simple gray sweatshirt up, keeping her head down. She was just another anonymous woman on a busy street. Finally, she hailed a cab and asked to be taken to the Port Authority bus terminal. The bus station was a chaotic swirl of humanity. People from all walks of life, all heading somewhere else. It was the perfect place to disappear. She paid in cash for a one-way ticket to a small, unremarkable town in upstate New York she had picked from her research. The ticket was for a bus leaving in less than an hour. As she sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, waiting to board, the enormity of what she had done finally hit her. She had just walked away from her entire life. She had no home, no money beyond the cash in her bag, and she was 8 months pregnant. A wave of pure terror washed over her. What if she couldn't do this? What if he found her? She clutched the diaper bag to her chest, the hard shape of the camera a reassuring pressure. She thought of the photos. Richard laughing with Isabel, his hand on hers. That was her insurance. That was her strength. She thought of the tiny life inside her, a life that deserved to be born into honesty and love, not into a gilded cage built on deceit. The call to board her bus crackled over the intercom. Amelia stood up, her back aching, and joined the queue of weary travelers. With each step towards the bus, she felt a sense of finality. She was no longer Amelia Sterling, the millionaire's wife. That woman had vanished tonight. The woman walking onto this bus was someone new. She didn't have a name yet, but she had something Amelia Sterling had lost a long time ago. A chance at a real life. As the bus pulled out of the station, leaving the glittering lights of the city behind, she didn't look back. The town was called Havenwood. The name was a coincidence, but it felt like a sign. It was a small, quiet place nestled in the rolling hills of upstate New York, the kind of town people pass through without a second thought. For Amelia, it was a sanctuary. The bus had dropped her off at a sleepy station in the pre-dawn chill, and as she stood on the quiet main street, watching the town slowly wake up, she took her first breath of truly free air. It was crisp, clean, and smelled of pine needles and damp earth. It was the furthest thing from the sterile, filtered air of the penthouse. Her new identity was Grace Turner. It was a simple, sturdy name, a name that felt grounded. Using the documents Sarah had created and a carefully rehearsed backstory about escaping an abusive ex-boyfriend, she managed to rent a small, furnished apartment above a bookstore. The apartment was tiny with mismatched furniture and a window that looked out onto a quiet, tree-lined street instead of a city skyline. It was perfect. The first few weeks were a blur of exhaustion, anxiety, and a profound, bone-deep relief. The constant fear of being discovered was a shadow that followed her everywhere. Every time a police car drove by, her heart would leap into her throat. Every unfamiliar face felt like a potential threat. She paid for everything in cash, avoided security cameras, and kept to herself. She spent her days walking the quiet streets, exploring the local library, and sitting in the small park by the river, feeling her baby move and grow within her. Her trauma was a heavy cloak. At night, she'd be jolted awake by nightmares of Richard finding her, his face a mask of cold rage. The emotional whiplash of her escape left her raw and vulnerable. There were moments of overwhelming doubt, where the sheer insanity of her situation threatened to crush her. She was alone, pregnant, with no safety net. But then she would feel a kick, a flutter from her baby, and the fierce, primal instinct of a mother would rise up, silencing the fear. She was doing this for him. She had to be strong for him. Slowly, cautiously, she began to build a life. She found a part-time, under-the-table job, shelving books at the library, a quiet, peaceful job that allowed her to fade into the background. She registered for prenatal care at the local community clinic, where no one asked for more than her name and a mailing address. The nurses were kind, their gentle hands and reassuring words, a stark contrast to the cold, clinical efficiency of the high-priced obstetrician she had seen in the city. It was at the clinic that she met Dr. Ben Carter. He was a local GP who volunteered at the clinic twice a week. He had warm, crinkling eyes and a gentle, unassuming manner that immediately put her at ease. He was the first person in Havenwood who saw past the scared, withdrawn woman she presented to the world. During one of her checkups, he noticed her sketching in a small notebook while she waited. She had started drawing again, simple pictures of the trees and birds outside her window. It was a way to process her emotions, to reconnect with the part of herself she had suppressed for so long. "That's really good," he said, his voice soft. He was looking at a drawing of a small sparrow, its head cocked curiously. "You have a real talent." Amelia's cheeks flushed. "Oh, it's just a silly hobby," she mumbled, quickly closing the notebook. "I don't think it's silly at all," Ben said, his smile genuine. "It's beautiful." He didn't press, didn't ask any probing questions. He simply treated her with a quiet respect that she found herself craving. Their interactions at the clinic were brief and professional, but his kindness was a small, steady light in her lonely existence. He would ask how she was feeling, not just physically, but emotionally. He'd recommend a good place to get soup or a walking trail with a nice view. They were small gestures, but to Amelia they felt monumental. One afternoon, as she was leaving the library after her shift, a sudden downpour started. She was caught without an umbrella, huddling under the small awning, wondering how she would make it the few blocks home without getting soaked. A moment later, a familiar, slightly battered pickup truck pulled up to the curb. Ben Carter rolled down the passenger window. "Looks like you could use a ride," he said, his smile as warm as ever. Amelia hesitated. Her first instinct was to say no, to retreat into the safety of her anonymity. But looking at his open, friendly face, she felt a flicker of trust. "I don't want to be a bother." "It's no bother at all. Hop in." The ride to her apartment was mostly silent, the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers filling the space between them. "Thank you," she said as he pulled up in front of the bookstore. "You saved me." "Anytime, Grace," he said. He paused, his expression turning serious for a moment. "Listen, I know you're new here, and I don't want to overstep, but if you ever need anything or just someone to talk to, I'm around. Havenwood can be a lonely place if you don't know anyone." Tears pricked Amelia's eyes, and she looked away, embarrassed by her sudden flood of emotion. It was the first time someone had offered her help without wanting anything in return. "Thank you, Ben. That means a lot." That small act of kindness was a turning point. It didn't erase her fear or her past, but it made her feel less like a ghost and more like a person. She started to see Havenwood not just as a hiding place, but as a potential home. She spoke to her neighbors, learned the name of the baker who sold the best sourdough bread, and even attended a free yoga class for expectant mothers in the community hall. She was still Grace Turner, a woman with a fabricated past, but for the first time, she felt like she might have a future. One evening, curiosity got the better of her. She allowed herself a rare, risky visit to the internet using one of the library's public computers. She typed Richard's name into the search bar. The results were immediate and plentiful. News articles, society pages, business journals. There were reports of her sudden and mysterious disappearance. Richard had played his part beautifully. He was quoted as being utterly devastated and concerned for his wife's fragile emotional state. He had hired a private investigator, he said, but mostly he was just praying for her safe return. He was the picture of a heartbroken, worried husband. Then she saw the announcement. Sterling Corp was hosting its annual Starlight Gala, the biggest charity event of the season, in 2 weeks. And this year it would be hosted by Richard Sterling and the company's brilliant new PR consultant, Ms. Isabelle Renault. Isabelle Renault, the name hit her like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just having an affair with her, he was putting her on public display, flaunting her. He was replacing Amelia in every aspect of his life, professionally and personally, all while pretending to be the victim. The audacity of it, the sheer calculated cruelty, reignited the cold fury that had been simmering beneath the surface of her new, quiet life. She looked at the date of the gala. It was just a few days before her due date. A new, terrifying, and powerful idea began to form in her mind. She had run. She had hidden. She had made herself small to survive. But seeing his smug face next to Isabel's name, she realized that hiding forever wasn't enough. He was controlling the narrative, painting her as the villain, the unstable wife who had abandoned her perfect life. As long as his version of the story was the only one being told, she and her son would never be truly safe. She had to go back, not as Amelia Sterling, the runaway wife, but as a witness. She had to see it for herself, to gather one last piece of evidence. She had to see the man who had shattered her life stand up in front of the world and lie. It was a monumental risk. Going back to the city was like walking back into the lion's den. But looking down at her belly, feeling the strong, steady presence of her son, she knew she had to do it. She was no longer just running away from her past. She was going back to reclaim her future. Returning to the city was a jarring, surreal experience. The familiar skyline that had once been her wallpaper was now an oppressive collection of jagged peaks, each one a potential vantage point for Richard's spies. The noise, the crowds, the frantic energy, it all felt alien after the gentle quiet of Havenwood. Amelia, disguised as Grace Turner, was a ghost haunting her old life. Her disguise was simple but effective. She wore a plain, dark-colored maternity dress, comfortable flat shoes, and a pair of large, non-prescription glasses. Her hair, once professionally styled into soft, golden waves, was now its natural, slightly darker shade, pulled back into a simple, severe bun. She looked tired, nondescript, and utterly forgettable. The perfect camouflage. She had taken a bus back, arriving the morning of the gala. She checked into a cheap, anonymous motel near the airport, paying in cash. Her movements were careful, deliberate, the culmination of weeks of planning. The centerpiece of her plan was the ticket. Through a series of anonymous online message boards, she had found a low-level catering assistant who was willing to sell her staff pass for a few $100s. It was a gamble, but it paid off. The pass wouldn't get her into the ballroom with the guests, but it would get her inside the hotel, into the heart of the beast. That evening, as she pinned the event staff badge to her dress, her reflection in the motel's cheap, warped mirror was that of a stranger. Her face was pale, her eyes large and dark with a mixture of terror and resolve. Her belly was a prominent, undeniable truth beneath the dark fabric. She placed a protective hand over it. "Just for a little while, my love," she whispered. "Then we go home." The hotel was a palace of gleaming marble and shimmering crystal chandeliers. The air buzzed with the chatter of the city's wealthiest and most powerful. Women in designer gowns dripped with diamonds, and men in sharp tuxedos exuded an aura of effortless command. Amelia had been to this gala before, on Richard's arm. She had worn the gowns, the diamonds. Now she slipped in through a service entrance, her head down, just another cog in the massive machine that made a night like this possible. She found a small dark alcove on the mezzanine level, a service area for the waitstaff that overlooked the main ballroom. It was partially obscured by a large floral arrangement and offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the stage and the main floor. Peeking through the leaves of a large fern, her heart hammered against her ribs. The room was a sea of familiar faces, people she had once called friends, people who had undoubtedly been fed Richard's apathetic, carefully crafted story. They were laughing, drinking champagne, oblivious. And then she saw him. Richard was standing near the stage, holding court. He looked magnificent, a king in his element. He was smiling, shaking hands, accepting condolences for his terrible ordeal with a somber, practiced nod. He was the picture of grace under pressure, the wronged husband bearing his burden with dignity. The sight of it, the sheer hypocrisy, made Amelia physically ill. A moment later, a woman joined him, Isabelle Renaud. She was even more stunning in person. She wore a sleek, blood-red dress that clung to her like a second skin. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, and her smile was dazzling. She placed a hand on Richard's arm, a gesture of ownership, of intimacy. He turned to her, and the look that passed between them was electric. It was a look of shared secrets, of victory. Amelia's hand tightened on the railing in front of her. This was it, the confirmation she both craved and dreaded. This was not a new romance born from his grief. This was the triumphant culmination of a long-planned coup. They were flaunting their relationship in the very room where, a year ago, Amelia had stood by his side. She watched them for what felt like an eternity. She saw Isabelle whisper something in his ear that made him laugh, a deep, genuine laugh Amelia hadn't heard in years. She saw him place a proprietary hand on the small of Isabelle's back as they navigated the crowd. Every gesture was a stab to Amelia's heart. This was the man she had loved, the man she had married, the father of her child, and he had erased her as if she had never existed. The lights in the ballroom dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. A spotlight found the stage. Richard walked to the podium, Isabelle standing just behind him, a supportive, adoring presence. He tapped the microphone, the sound echoing through the vast space. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice smooth and confident. "Thank you all for being here tonight to support such a worthy cause. As many of you know, this has been a difficult year for me." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. A murmur of sympathy rippled through the audience. "My wife, Amelia," he said her name, and she flinched in her hiding spot. "Mo chose to leave, and while I will never understand her decision, and I continue to pray for her well-being every day, I have come to realize that life must go on." He turned and looked at Isabelle, his eyes filled with a manufactured sincerity. He reached for her hand. "And I have been incredibly fortunate to have found a guiding light in the darkness, a partner, a confidant, and a brilliant colleague. Ms. Isabelle Renaud has not only transformed Sterling Corp's public image, she has transformed my life." He pulled Isabelle forward into the spotlight with him. The crowd erupted in applause. It was a carefully staged, perfectly executed public relations move. The embattled millionaire finding love again after his tragic abandonment. It was a story people would eat up. From her dark perch, Amelia felt a strange sense of calm descend over her. The pain, the anger, the fear, it all melted away, replaced by an ice-cold clarity. She saw everything for what it was. This wasn't about love or loss. This was about control, about power, about Richard Sterling writing his own story and making sure everyone believed it. But he had made one critical mistake. He assumed the main character of his previous story was gone for good. He was so confident in his narrative, so sure of his own power, that he couldn't imagine anyone challenging it. He was parading his mistress at a gala, completely unaware that his very pregnant, very wronged wife was in the room, watching his every move, ready to write a new ending. The first contraction hit her then, a low, tightening cramp that stole her breath. It was sharp, sudden, and undeniable. Her baby was coming, and so she realized was the truth. The contraction was a jolt, a physical manifestation of the storm that had been brewing inside her for months. Another followed, stronger this time, wrapping around her belly like a vice. Her baby was on its way here, in this hotel, surrounded by enemies. The primal, urgent reality of it eclipsed everything else. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but then she looked down at the stage. Richard was raising a glass, toasting Isabel, toasting their new beginning. The sight of their triumph, their utter lack of remorse, solidified her fear into something hard and sharp. Rage. Her son would not be born in the shadows while his father celebrated a lie. Moving with a purpose she didn't know she possessed, Amelia left her hiding spot. She walked not towards the exit, but towards the grand staircase that led down to the ballroom floor. Her event staff badge gave her passage. The security guards barely glanced at her. She was invisible, a servant, just as Richard had always seen her. Each step down the marble stairs was punctuated by the rhythm of her contractions. Breathe in. Step. Breathe out. Step. The pain was grounding, focusing. She wasn't just a woman anymore. She was a force of nature, an imminent event. The people on the main floor, the city's elite, parted for her without thinking, their eyes fixed on the spectacle on stage. They didn't see the tired-looking woman in the plain dress, her hand pressed against her back, her face a mask of determination. Richard was finishing his speech. And so I ask you to join me in welcoming the new face of the Sterling Corp Foundation, a woman of unparalleled vision and grace, Isabel Renault. The applause was thunderous. Isabel stepped forward, beaming, accepting a bouquet of roses. This was her coronation. Thank you, Richard, Isabel purred into the microphone. It's an honor to... Richard. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the applause like a shard of glass. It came from the back of the room, amplified by the sudden, curious silence. A single spotlight, operated by a confused technician, swung wildly before landing on the source of the interruption. And there she was, Amelia. Standing in the middle of the ballroom, her face pale but resolute, her pregnancy undeniable. Her simple dress was a stark contrast to the glittering gowns around her. She looked like an apparition, a ghost from a life everyone had been instructed to forget. A collective gasp went through the room. Cell phones, which had been discreetly filming the speech, now turned on her. The flashes started, like a sudden burst of lightning. On stage, Richard froze. His face went slack, the color draining from it. For a single eternal moment, he looked like a man who had seen a ghost. Beside him, Isabel's perfect smile faltered, her eyes widening in disbelief and fury. Amelia! Richard's voice was a choked whisper, barely picked up by the microphone. Amelia took a slow, deliberate step forward. Another contraction seized her, and she paused, breathing through it, her eyes never leaving his. The entire room watched, captivated, as this silent, visceral drama played out. You said you were praying for my well-being, she said, her voice shaking but clear, carrying through the silent hall. Did you pray that I was safe, or just that I would stay gone? Richard stared at her, his mind clearly racing, searching for a way to spin this, to control it. Amelia, darling, you're not well, he started, falling back on his old script. You're confused. Security... I'm not confused, Richard, she interrupted, taking another step. Actually, I've never been more clear in my entire life. She looked from his face to Isabel's. I see everything now. The lunches, the late-night meetings, the business trips. She turned her gaze to the audience, to the sea of shocked faces and raised phones. This man, my husband, stood you all up here tonight and told you a story about a fragile, unstable wife who abandoned him. He is the victim, you see. Another, more powerful contraction hit her, and she gasped, bending slightly. A woman in the front row, a doctor perhaps, took an involuntary step towards her before her husband pulled her back. Amelia straightened up, sweat beading on her forehead. The real story, she continued, her voice rising in strength, is that my husband has been having an affair with Ms. Renault for over a year. The real story is that they were planning a future together, a future that didn't include me or the son I am currently carrying. Her hand went to her belly. His son. The room erupted in frantic whispers. The narrative Richard had so carefully constructed was shattering in real time. Isabel, recovering from her shock, stepped to the microphone. This is absurd, she said, her voice sharp and commanding. This woman is clearly having a breakdown. She needs medical attention, not an audience. You're right, Amelia said, looking directly at Isabel. I do need medical attention. I'm in labor. That declaration silenced the room completely. The drama had just escalated to a level no one could have anticipated. Richard looked utterly panicked, trapped in the spotlight. His perfect evening turned into a public relations apocalypse. "But before I go," Amelia said, her voice softening, but losing none of its intensity, "I have a gift. An early anniversary present for you, Richard." From the simple purse slung over her shoulder, she pulled out a small, unassuming object. Her grandfather's camera. "I took up a hobby in my final weeks at home. Photography." She unlatched the back of the camera. With a flick of her wrist, she pulled the roll of film out, its brown ribbon unfurling in the harsh light. She held it up for everyone to see. "It's a collection," she announced. "I call it The Betrayal. There are some lovely shots of you two at the Hotel Elysian, a few more from that charming little cafe in the West Village. My personal favorites are the ones where you're kissing in the back of your town car. You really should be more careful about drawn curtains, Richard." She let the implications hang in the air. The physical proof. The undeniable evidence that would soon be in the hands of every news outlet in the city. She let the spool of film drop to the floor. It was a symbolic act. She didn't need it anymore. Her testimony, delivered here, in this room, while in labor with his child, was more powerful than any photograph. She looked at Richard one last time. The mask of the powerful CEO was gone. In its place was the face of a small, trapped man, his empire of lies crumbling around him. There was no pity in her heart, only a vast, aching emptiness where her love for him used to be. "I believe you know my lawyer's number," she said, her voice suddenly weary. Then she turned her back on him, on the life he represented, and faced the stunned crowd. "Can someone please call me an ambulance?" she asked, her voice cracking with pain and exhaustion. "My son is coming." And as the doctor from the front row rushed to her side, the flashes from the cameras reached a blinding, fever-pitch crescendo. The Sterling Gala had its headline, but it wasn't the one Richard Sterling had paid for. The birth of Leo Sterling was front-page news. It was a story of such cinematic drama that no PR firm on earth, least of all Isabel Renault's, could spin it. The headlines were brutal. "Sterling heir born amid Gala scandal. Millionaire's mistress exposed by wife in labor. The unveiling, how Amelia Sterling took down an empire." The photos of Amelia, pale and defiant in the ballroom, were everywhere. The image of the unfurled film canister on the marble floor became a symbol of the entire sordid affair. The aftermath for Richard was a swift and catastrophic implosion. The board of Sterling Corp, facing a shareholder revolt and a PR nightmare that was tanking their stock price, demanded his immediate resignation. His powerful friends distanced themselves, their loyalty as superficial as the society they inhabited. Isabel Renault, her career and reputation in tatters, disappeared from public view, her name becoming a cautionary tale. Richard was left alone in his glass tower, surrounded by the wreckage of his own making. For Amelia, the aftermath was a whirlwind of a different kind. She gave birth to a healthy, beautiful boy in a private hospital room, paid for by an anonymous donor. She suspected it was the doctor from the Gala. The moment the nurse placed Leo in her arms, the world outside, with its flashing cameras and screaming headlines, melted away. All that mattered was this tiny, perfect human she had fought so hard to protect. He had his father's dark hair, but her eyes. Looking at him, she felt a love so fierce and absolute it left no room for bitterness or regret. Her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Clara, descended upon Richard with the full force of the law. Armed with Amelia's story, the testimony of dozens of Gala attendees, and the threat of the photographs, which Amelia had wisely made copies of before destroying the original film, Clara negotiated one of the most staggering divorce settlements the city had ever seen. Richard, desperate to avoid further public humiliation and a protracted court battle, agreed to all of it. Amelia was given a lump sum that ensured she and Leo would be financially secure for the rest of their lives. She was also granted sole, uncontested custody of their son. The penthouse, the cars, the lavish lifestyle. She wanted none of it. She wanted freedom. Richard was granted supervised visitation rights to be enacted only when Leo was older and only if Amelia deemed him to be a stable, positive influence. He had not only lost his wife and his company, he had lost his heir. Instead of staying in the city, the scene of both her imprisonment and her liberation, Amelia did the one thing no one expected. She went back to Havenwood. When she arrived, carrying Leo in a simple baby carrier, The town greeted her not as a celebrity or a scandal, but as one of their own. The story had, of course, reached them, but in this small, quiet community, it was just background noise. They knew her as Grace Turner, the quiet librarian who was expecting a baby. And now she was Grace, the new mom. Ben Carter was one of the first people she saw. He was at the local market, and he stopped when he saw her, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. He looked at the baby sleeping soundly against her chest, and his eyes were full of a quiet, gentle warmth. "Welcome back, Grace," he said softly. "He's beautiful." "Thank you, Ben," she said, her own smile feeling natural and easy for the first time in years. "For everything." The conversation was short, but it was laden with unspoken understanding. He didn't ask about the headlines, about Richard, about the chaos she had left behind. He just saw her, and her son. Life in Havenwood settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. Amelia, she was Amelia again, she had decided to reclaim her own name, bought a small, charming house on the edge of town with a large garden. She spent her days with Leo, watching him discover the world, his laughter the only sound that mattered. The millions from the settlement sat in a trust fund, largely untouched. She lived simply. She reconnected with Sarah, who came to visit and cried when she met Leo, apologizing profusely for not realizing how much danger Amelia had been in. "You don't have to apologize, Waynon," Amelia told her, hugging her tightly. "You saved me. You gave me a chance." She started illustrating again. She turned the little pictures she had sketched in her notebook, the birds, the trees, the kind-eyed doctor, into a children's book. It was a simple story about a little bird who gets lost, but finds a new, kinder forest to call home. She saw Ben often. He would stop by her house on his way home from the clinic, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to see how she and Leo were doing. They would sit on her porch while Leo slept, talking for hours. She told him the whole story, not the sensationalized media version, but her version. The loneliness, the fear, the gradual erosion of her soul in that gilded cage. He listened without judgment, his presence a comforting, steady anchor. He told her about his own life, how he had left a lucrative surgical practice in a big city after his wife died of cancer, seeking a slower, more meaningful existence. They were two people who had been broken by their pasts and were trying to piece together a new future. One cool autumn evening, as they sat on her porch swing, watching the leaves turn brilliant shades of red and gold, Ben reached over and gently took her hand. His touch wasn't possessive or demanding. It was warm, respectful, and felt like coming home. "You're an incredible woman, Amelia," he said, his voice quiet, "and an amazing mother." Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of gratitude. She had walked through fire, faced down the monster in her fairy tale, and had come out the other side, not unscathed, but whole. The world saw her as the woman who had exposed her millionaire husband. But here, in this quiet town, holding the hand of a good man, with her son sleeping peacefully inside, she was just Amelia, and that was more than enough. The aftermath of the storm wasn't wreckage. It was the clean, quiet world that comes after the rain. A year passed. The seasons in Havenwood turned, each one painting the small town in a new palette of colors. The fiery brilliance of autumn gave way to the quiet white blanket of winter, which in turn melted into the vibrant, hopeful green of spring. With each changing season, Amelia felt a layer of her old life sloughing off, replaced by something new, something real. Her house was no longer just a house. It was a home, filled with the delightful chaos of a growing boy. Leo was now a toddler, a whirlwind of chubby-legged energy and infectious giggles. He had her eyes and a stubborn determination that she suspected came from both his parents. His first word was mama, his second was Ben. Ben had become a constant, gentle presence in their lives. He was there for Leo's first steps, for his first tooth, for the fevers and the scraped knees. He never tried to replace Richard, never pushed for a title or a definition of their relationship. He was simply there, a steady, loving man who adored her son and respected her journey. Their love story wasn't a whirlwind romance like her first one. It was a slow, quiet bloom built on a foundation of shared vulnerability, mutual respect, and the simple joy of watching a child chase butterflies in the garden. The money from the settlement, the vast fortune that had once defined her life, now felt like a distant echo. She used it to set up a foundation that provided resources for women and children escaping domestic abuse, a quiet, anonymous way to turn her pain into purpose. Her own richness came not from a bank account, but from the wealth of everyday moments. The weight of Leo's sleepy head on her shoulder, the taste of vegetables grown in her own garden, the comfortable silence she could share with Ben. Her children's book, The Little Bird's New Forest, was published by a small independent press. It didn't become a bestseller, but it found its way into local libraries and schools. One afternoon, while reading it to a group of children at the Havenwood Library, she saw a little girl in the front row with wide, scared eyes. After the reading, the girl's mother came up to her. "Thank you," the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "We just left a bad situation. Your book, it gave my daughter hope." In that moment, Amelia understood the true meaning of success. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about connection, about turning your own story into a light for someone else in the darkness. Richard had tried to contact her a few times through his lawyers, making noise about his visitation rights. Amelia, guided by Clara's counsel and her own maternal instincts, held firm. Richard had not demonstrated any meaningful change. His public apologies were hollow, crafted by PR teams, and his attempts to see Leo felt rooted in a desire to reclaim a piece of his legacy, not in genuine fatherly love. She sent him photos, kept him updated on Leo's milestones, but she would not allow his toxic influence to touch her son's life until he had done the real, difficult work of changing himself. Perhaps he never would. That was his story to write, not hers. One sunny summer afternoon, a year to the day after the gala, Amelia was in her garden teaching Leo how to water the tomato plants. Ben was on the porch, sketching in a notebook, a hobby he had picked up from her. Leo, laughing, turned the little watering can on his own feet, squealing with delight. Watching them, a profound sense of peace settled over Amelia. She thought of the woman she had been, the scared, lonely wife in the penthouse, the terrified fugitive on the bus, the avenging angel in the ballroom. They were all parts of her, but they were not the sum of her. The woman standing here, in the sun-drenched garden, with dirt on her knees and love in her heart, was who she was meant to be all along. She had lost a life of unimaginable luxury, a life of privilege and glamour that others could only dream of. But she had gained something infinitely more valuable: herself. She had found her voice, her strength, her purpose. She had discovered a different kind of rich, one measured in laughter, kindness, and peace of mind. Ben looked up from his sketchbook and caught her eye. He smiled, a smile that held all the love and understanding in the world. In his eyes, she saw her future. It wasn't a fairy tale, and there was no gilded cage. It was just life, real, messy, beautiful, and hers. And now, I turn it over to you. Imagine you were in Amelia's shoes, trapped in that beautiful prison, knowing the man you loved was living a double life. You're pregnant, isolated, and he controls all the power. What would you have done? Would you have confronted him, knowing he would twist your words and paint you as crazy? Would you have simply left, disappearing quietly into the night? Or would you have done what Amelia did, bided your time, gathered your evidence, and orchestrated a moment of reckoning so public and so powerful that the truth could not be denied? Let us know in the comments below.